Hi, this is Paul. The following I clipped from this morning's live stream. Lance started the live stream. The morning live streams, if you want to participate, are usually both streamed on Luke Thompson's channel and Grail Country, or sometimes only Grail Country. Lance launched this one. Many of the faces are regulars. Chad is, of course, doing some tile. Sam is on, and I used some clips from the earlier part of this conversation about sincerity and authenticity. That's going to be coming out for tomorrow morning's homeroom conversation. But I thought Sam and David and Lance and Jess, really nailed a whole bunch of things in the demon conversation. Now, I think there's a few things to say about this. Modernity is receding. Yes, things are going to get wild, but they're not going to get wild in some weird ways that people imagine them to be. A lot of this has been around in, let's say, non-elite culture for a very long time. Roman Catholics, Orthodox, Pentecostals, various kinds of Protestants have lived in this world for a long time, and so it isn't unknown. It's just how this stuff is going to once again be part of regular normie culture is sort of what's going on. Ross Douthat had read the Scott Alexander piece and said something like the fact, well, I thought it was good until he started to cope at the end. Sam made a similar conference because Scott Alexander is a materialist. And so, well, how exactly are you going to deal sort of normie culture, blue church? How are you going to deal when this stuff is now a regular part of our conversations, when we're not just talking about capitalism, but the spirit of capitalism? We don't mean it as sort of a metaphor, and communism and a bunch of these kinds of things. Family calling. When I think about these things, I often think about C.S. Lewis's comment that there's sort of two equal and opposite errors with respect to this stuff. Think about it too much or think about it too little. And I think what we're going to see is, well, here I'm showing you this map. I'm trying to help my family find a restaurant. What you can see is sort of a renegotiation in society. And the same thing is happening with UFOs. The same, and it's going to be, again, this social fact, this modernity bias is going to go away, and these new realities there's going to be an accounting of them. But it's not going to be, it will both be like and not like the past. I mean, that's, again, my best sense of what's happening. And again, this is happening very slowly. It's not like it's going to happen just sort of right away, even though things seem to be moving quickly now. To those of us who are paying attention to this, for many people, it's not going to change. Many people who go to church that have theology about angel and demons, those theologies will be sort of recalibrated and adjusted, but not sort of completely moved. Same thing's going to happen with materialists and modernists. There's going to continue to be readjusted and recalibrated. And so this book, now I've just started reading this book, and I read the preface to it. And so, yeah, there's room also to sort of to understand that this is Scott Alexander's take on the book, and not necessarily the book itself, because the founder of IFS, very, in the chapter quite strong. Well, no, not demons, but others are like, yeah, kind of demons, these little subpersonalities, et cetera, et cetera. And even when you listen to, say, Jordan Peterson talking about subpersonalities, Jonathan Peugeot talking about, being able to conceptualize this particular passion of mine as sort of a little demon. You can find that on the conversation that I had with him. I actually clipped up that conversation. Maybe I'll throw some of those clips in here, because that gets at what's been happening. And so this is going to continue to happen. So maybe I'll throw some of those clips from my conversation with Jonathan Peugeot that he and I had almost 4 years ago, and then I'll add some of the live stream that happened today. And that'll just give a little bit more context to this morning's video. Somehow, when personality gets involved, all of our motivations get redirected. And
Yeah.
so when you talk about, angels and space aliens, say a little bit more about that in terms of how you think, how they work in our imaginary.
Right. Well, yeah, sadly, I don't think right now they work in the right manner. I think that it comes with the same problem of taking consciousness for granted. People are offended at the idea of speaking of God. Like I said, God transcends personhood. That is definite. But personhood is part of God. There is, the notion that God is three persons is extremely important in terms of understanding what a person is, and also, like I said, because we take consciousness for granted, somehow we're bothered by the fact that consciousness exists. It's so funny. People always, people aren't offended by the idea that sometimes you hear people say, like, I believe that God is more, or if there is a God, that he's more like a force, like a kind of impersonal thing. And you think, so why does it bother you? Why does consciousness bother you? Why do you think that intentionality doesn't exist? That it's a freak thing that exists only in human beings for some reason? It's like there are patterns. There are patterns of being, and that's what personalities are, right? They're patterns of being. They're patterns that are coherent, and they're coherent in a way that they manifest a purpose. And so that's intentionality. And within us, we have several little smaller beings. We also have all these personalities inside us that have their own little coherences, not so much sometimes. And so I don't know why that's so weird to think, because we're not that obviously one coherent conscious being, that we are but constituted with all these little consciousnesses. Why is it so weird to think that would scale up? I don't understand why it's weird. And so I that's why for me it's almost like a mystery when I listen to people. I always think it's just because you don't understand what is consciousness. You don't understand what constitutes a being, how a being is not obvious in terms of scientific analysis, that there really has to be something which pulls it together. And so to me, the once we start to see that, then angels, the idea of angels they just don't, they're not a big deal anymore. Like they're as and the idea of demons too. I mean, to me, demons are just principalities which are not united in this coherent hierarchy, and that's how the church fathers present them, anyways. So you have some usually it's aligned with a passion, and makes sense because that's what it happens in us. You have a person, you have a pattern inside you, and this pattern kind of runs, and it has its own coherence. But what it does, it's pulling you away from your central core. So it's making you resent something. It's making you hate your children. It's making you like whatever pattern that is there. And you're fighting against it. You're trying to bring it in, and sometimes you can't, and it kind of pulls you. To me, that's just, it's a demon. It's a little demon that is pulling you. And if you read like the mystics, they talk about demons, that you're full of demons, or that their demons are constantly, either they say you're full of demons, or they'll say things like they're demons riding on you. Like you have demons riding on your back, like all these demons that are riding on you. And I think it's just an imagistic way of saying that you have these patterns which are pulling you into death, that are ripping you apart, that are decomposing you. And so you need to bring it together. And so there are cosmic demons in a city. You have certain patterns of behavior. Let's say in a city, you'll have a pattern of behavior, which is jaywalking, where everybody jaywalks. I remember there was a story about Giuliani, about how everybody in New York was jaywalking, and Giuliani understood that pattern of behavior, it looked like it was a detail, but it was actually manifesting a much deeper reality, which is that there was no social cohesion in New York City. And so he said, I'm going to exercise this demon. And once it's exercised, it's actually going to help coagulate the city, bring it together so that it has more cohesion. And so he went after jaywalkers and just gave tickets. And at first people were going crazy, like, what is he doing? Why is he attacking jaywalkers? But he kind of understood that we need to exercise these little demons so that the being can now come together. And so that little pattern of behavior everybody was doing it. It wasn't like people were talking to each other and say, "Oh, are you jaywalking? Oh no, are you jaywalking? Yeah, I jaywalk." No, nobody does it. It was like this implicit pattern of behavior in the city. I mean, it could be littering, it could be all kinds of things. And once you let it go too far, then it's really hard to bring it back. Like let's say once a civic pattern starts to manifest itself in a city, where it's okay to break people's windows, let's say, all of a sudden it becomes okay to break people's windows. It's really hard to come back from that, and then things can degenerate into chaos. I mean, I lived in cities in Africa where the social fabric had been so destroyed by war and all kinds of crazy events that it was almost impossible to bring it back, because everybody had all these little demons were kind of pulling the city into all these directions, and it was nearly impossible to bring it back. Okay, so I think that once again the problem arises with, again, the difficulty of understanding being and understanding consciousness. Again, it's the same problem. Let me give you an example within yourself, right? Do you think that those demons, let's say those little patterns, do you think they don't have agency? Of course they have agency, right? They know what they want, right? They know exactly what they want. And you can, if you're sensitive, if you're a little bit attentive, you can see that you're actually talking to them, that you can talk to your demons, and you make deals with your demons all the time, right? Imagine a smoker, right? So the smoker, what the demon wants is for that person to pretty much chain smoke all the time. That's what the demon wants, right? And so then you make a deal with the demon. You say, okay, I'm gonna smoke, like 3 cigarettes a day, or like whatever amount that you decide that you're gonna smoke. And when you're doing that, you're negotiating with your demon, and you know that if you just let it go, if you just let the demon pull you out, like you would be smoking all the time, or if it's drinking or whatever desire, if it's just eating, you could just eat all the time because that's pulling you. But you make a deal. You're like, okay, no, I'm going to negotiate with this. And so I think that it's the same. It's kind of the same thing going up. I think that agency is just a pattern of being. The problem with the manner in which we understand freedom is that we understand freedom as the capacity to do whatever you want. And I think that that's really a misunderstanding of freedom. Freedom is the capacity to act from within your own self, and not be fully, let's say, determined by your outer circumstance. Okay. And so that's what agency is. So that's what I think freedom and agency are. And so if that's what freedom and agency are, then you can understand that a pattern has its own energy, like it has its own will and its own thing. And so it has the capacity to act. And then also, because patterns are made of smaller patterns, it also has the capacity to manage those smaller patterns, and then to let themselves get pulled in one direction or the other. So there is this, that's kind of what I think agency is. And so to me, the idea that you can pray to like the angel of a city, it's like, that's what you're doing if you write a letter of complaint to the city council. Like, who's the city council, or who's the city? Like, you write a letter of complaint to the city. Like, who are you writing it to? You're not writing it to anybody. You're writing it to the city. And so you're actually engaging, you're praying to the city. You're asking the city to do something for you. And it can answer. Does it mean it's going to answer? Might not answer. Might answer in a way you don't like it to answer, but it can answer. And so to me, that's just kind of how it works. And so the idea that you pray to God, or that you pray to other beings, that it either be to the pastor, you pray to the pastor, you ask the pastor to I mean, people use the word prayer in such a special way.
I know.
It's like, it's not, the word pray just means to ask for something.
That's an English issue, I know, because right. In Spanish and in Greek and other languages, the words are commonality, but when you say it in English, I just know a lot of Protestants, and my head is going bing, 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 bing.
Yeah,
bing.
exactly. No, you don't, but you do all the time, right? You ask someone to help you change your tire. You ask, and so you're constantly praying, and beings answer your prayer. And so to me, the idea that you can pray to higher beings, you can ask for things, is to me is just not a big deal. And the fact that you can pray to God, to me, is that you can pray, that you can address your prayer to the highest, let's say, I think is not a problem. I do think this is where maybe you will totally disagree with me, but I do think that often, because the word God also is so wide, I think that often when someone prays to God, to ask God for some very petty thing, I think usually they're not really praying to God. They're praying to something that's lower. They just don't totally know, it's like, so that's maybe the more, let's say, idea of a Catholic person who would ask, some saint to find a parking place for them or something like that. That's really a very kind of petty, low thing. But it doesn't mean that it's not also possible. We don't understand people don't understand, like, again, it's always taking consciousness for granted. It's not understanding the manner in which consciousness, which language, which logos participates in how the world lays itself out. It does participate in how the world lays itself out. Whether to what extent it does, at what's the limit of that, is not that easy to determine, I think. But I think that for sure, when Jordan used the term "city of God," I also was surprised because I never heard him use it before. But then when you sent me a text from Maps of Meaning, which talks about the city of God and his description of it. Well, then the description that he talks about, I have seen him talk about it. This notion of this city, which is, that is the representation of order, but order in a manner which is also open, or let's say looking out towards chaos and not being completely secluded, but at the same time that is together and looking towards truth and looking towards responsibility, like you talked about. And so, yeah, I think that for sure, there is something, and it's also there is something kind of stoic about that in the manner that one of the things that seems to be missing is the glory, let's say, the participation in the glory, and that is something that, at least if you look at the mystical tradition and you look at this transformative tradition of what it means to be Christian, that you're meant to become, to do that, exactly what he said, to take your cross, to bear responsibility. There's all this tradition also, even in there's all these Orthodox stories about how people will take upon themselves even the the faults of others. There's all these wild tradition. I was looking at one pretty crazy tradition today about it's horrible that I don't remember her name. It was some Russian aristocrat who had heard that one of the priests in her city was having an affair with a prostitute, and so she went straight to his house, into his room, entered the room, took the prostitute, kicked her out of the room, and then got on her knees and said, "Father, I need to confess my sins." And I was like, it's like that, that's the city of God. It's like, oh my goodness, it's like she knows exactly what's true, and she goes to the end of it, and then she takes it back on herself and says, and supposedly then the priest totally converted and left horrible ways. But you see that St. Francis does that too. There's stories of St. Francis doing that too, where someone asks him, what about this priest who's living with a woman? And he kind of says, I don't even deserve to kiss this man's feet. And he gets on his knees and he kisses the priest's feet. And the priest's like, no, don't do that. You're killing me by doing that. And so there's this crazy transformation. And so I think that there's something really powerful about that. But then I think what's missing is also then this glory that you find in the lives of the saints. This this joy, right? This joy that comes, this surprise of joy that kind of comes in and fills the person, and kind of indescribable joy, or in a kind of the Orthodox, they often talk about joyful sadness, like this strange mix of joy, but also an awareness of all the suffering and all the difficulties of the world at the same time. Those two things join together. So I think that's maybe what's missing.
Things that I'm planning on, that then sent me to Plato and Augustine, because, person as a city, and that then brought me back to your principality. Mm-hmm. That, in a sense, what Giuliani does by finding jaywalkers is make it the city of Giuliani. But Giuliani, hate to what Giuliani has done with himself now.
I know. It's like, too bad we have to use him as an example. But,
yeah.
All good.
Yeah, had to bring up Giuliani.
He had his moment.
That's right. He had a moment. So here's a question for you. Now, myself as a minister, people will listen to me and say, well, Pastor, it's your job to try to make people Christians. Why do you want people to believe in God?
Mm-hmm. Why do I want people to believe in God? It's funny. I don't see it that way. Like, I think that the idea that people don't believe in God, to me, is so kind of irrelevant, because I think that not irrelevant. Like, it's kind of horrible that I'm saying that. People will be like, "What is he talking about?" It's just that I don't know what you mean. I also don't know what you mean when you say that that they believe in God. To me, it has to be more than just believing in God. Like, it has to be an entering onto a path, right? Entering onto a path of life, and that's what matters, right? What is it that it says even in Scripture, that the devil believes, Satan believes in God, and he trembles. And so it's not just about believing in God, but really entering on that path. And so I believe that that path of coming together, of turning together, of celebrating the right thing, of praising the right thing, of moving towards the right thing, I see it as the solution to our personal problems, to our family problems, to the community's problems. I see it basically as the way in which things will come together and have purpose and meaning, and not be constantly decomposing. And so to me, that's what my whole purpose is to help people see the coherence and the beauty and the power of this path, which is the Christian path. And so it's more to me than just believing in God. And that's why I almost never, sometimes I do, but I rarely talk about God, because I don't know, it's like, I'd rather kind of try to show you the transformational aspect of Christianity, try to show you how it transforms the world, and hopefully then it'll give you a glimpse of this divine mystery. But it's very difficult for me to talk directly about God. I tend to not want to do that too much. In some of the Q&As, people are always asking me questions about the Trinity. Then I'm answering. As I'm answering these questions, there's a little voice in my head saying, "Shut up, Jonathan. Shut up. Don't talk about the Trinity. Don't talk about that stuff." It's
Why?
not, because it doesn't, because a lot of, especially the Trinity, so many of those words have been so ruined. Like, they're so ruined. There's a mile, you have to walk a mile before you even get a sense of what they're talking about. There's a lot of stuff in Trinitarian theology that I trust, because I trust the fathers, and I trust the church, but there's a lot of stuff that I don't understand. Like, I don't okay, so the son is why am I talking about this again? It's like the Spirit proceeds, but the Son is engendered, and it's like, I don't know. I guess it's not. I don't totally, I don't completely. Let's say I don't understand it, at least rationally. I can't talk about it. I can talk about a lot of other stuff, but that particular thing, I'd rather, for now at least, I'd rather it kind of stay in a. Let people get there when they get there, and the people that are watching my videos, I think most of the people are kind of coming wide-eyed and now trying to see this, what is going on. And so I'd rather talk about patterns and beauty and how Christ. I talk about Christ. basically what I talk about most of the time, is talk about how Christ brings everything together. And so, yeah, that's been, I don't know, I can't totally explain it, but I really struggle to, I think I totally understand when Jordan, that's why I have so much sympathy for Jordan when people ask him, do you believe in God? And he's like, I don't want to answer your question. I don't want to answer that question, because that question is so loaded and it's so perverse that if I answer it, you won't understand it. Because if I just say yes, then you won't know what I'm talking about. And so I'd rather not answer it. I'll talk about all this other stuff. But then secretly, obviously, it's like I keep telling, like, it's obvious that Jordan believes in God. He said it in so many ways. He just doesn't want to say it that way, because he knows that, especially the people asking to that, they have ulterior motives. They either want to know if you're on our side, like, are you on our side? Are you one of us? Or are you one of them? Are you one of those guys? And he's like, I don't want to play this game. I'm not interested. So I think I'm kind of also avoiding that. That I'd rather just anyways, sorry, enough about that.
No, that was wonderful. That was fascinating. I was listening to you go through that. Okay, he's just setting us up for in Christ, and he didn't go there.
No.
Why?
Well, that's the thing. I'm revealing my secrets here. That's the thing, is that the whole manner in which I speak, and I think the whole way I wish I speak is I want, most of the time, like, I want you to kind of say some things, bring you, and then, because the problem with and then let you make that next step, because we've sadly heard the name of, we've heard preachers go at us for too long. Like, not you, you're good, but you know what I mean.
All
like
those other bad,
all preachers. Those other guys. We've heard them. We've come at us for too much, and to just want you to, like, if you believe in the name of Jesus, and all that stuff, and it's come to a point where it doesn't mean anything anymore. It doesn't mean anything. Believe in Jesus and you'll be saved. I don't know what you mean by believe. Not sure what you mean by Jesus, and saved for sure. I don't know what you're talking about. Okay. So all those things, like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so I'd rather talk about, bring people into that kind of mystery, and then let them see for themselves where it goes. And so that's why I'm always very careful in the way that I talk about this stuff, because of that. And I think it's been, a lot of it's been ruined. So let's help people understand the words, and then slowly, I always tell people, I hope that my hope, and I've said this in my videos before, that my hope is that one day most people will be able to say, our Father who is in heaven, and they won't have to explain it anymore. They won't have to say, but for now, you need to understand why we say Father. You need to understand why we say heaven. You need to understand all that stuff. And at some point, I do it. I can say our Father who is in heaven and not flinch at all, because I feel like I'm enough in the story that it's fine. But that's my hope, and so that's my hope for Jordan too, is that he sets up this whole story about how, this bottom up structure of how the Father, that we've kind of, all these images of different fathers have come together into this, like, essential image of the Father, and kind of doing this bottom up thing until we realize that there is this image of the Heavenly Father, and it's part of it's built in us, this image. And so now I don't have to say that, all that stuff, you don't have to say that anymore. You can just say, our Father who is in heaven, hallowed be your name. Do you see what I'm saying? And so that's what I want. That's what I want. That's kind of that's what I think I need to do, is to talk about those things first, and then we'll get there slowly. Already, like, the stuff about angels and principalities, I've been making these videos for like a year, and I've been wanting to talk about this stuff for a year, and I kept saying, no, it's not yet. Don't talk about this. Then the Don Hoffman stuff started coming out. I'm like, okay, this is the time's coming. Then Jordan and Sam had those discussions, and Sam keeps talking about consciousness. So at some point I thought, okay, now's the time, and I can talk about this stuff, because I think people have enough, at least people who have been watching my videos, they have enough foundation that they can hear me say these things without thinking that I'm talking about Marvel Comics superheroes you live in other dimensions when I talk about angels. Because you go to a church, when I was growing up, people would say stupid things like that. They would say, I think angels are beings in other dimensions. What are you talking about? Other dimensions? My goodness. Science fiction, it's like, and because we have Scientology and Mormonism and all of these kind of really disturbing materialistic religions, and a lot of Christians, they have that too. They just don't, sometimes it's not even conscious, but they think that demons are physical beings somehow, or that angels are physical beings. That they're not. They've never been. No one has ever thought they were. If you read the fathers, they either say that they're immaterial or they say that they have subtle bodies. It's like, okay, what does that mean? Subtle bodies. Well, I can give you examples of subtle bodies. It's like a story is a subtle body. They're all forms of subtle bodies. A city is a subtle body because you can't totally contain it. Like it's not completely. So you have different levels of bodies. Anyways, this is becoming a rant. That's not good.
This is fun. This is fun. If I were a journalist, I'd feel like I got a scoop. Jonathan Peugeot and the subtle bodies.
It's wild.
What's the summary?
So the summary is that there's this new therapy method or school of thought or practice called internal family systems, and I had heard Vervaeke and Jordan Hall.
A snake. Picture
Right.
it as a snake.
I had heard Jordan Hall and John Vervaeke talk about that. Was my first exposure to this, and my spidey sense was a little bit put off when I heard them talking about it. But basically, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to, like, you're with this therapist, and like, say you've got a problem. The example that Slate Star Codex gives is like, say you've got a problem like where you always seem to self-destruct when you start a new intimate relationship. And so you kind of go into this like trance-like hypnotic state, and you're supposed to find within yourself the part of yourself or the person within yourself that is sort of causing the problem. And then you let that person identify as a name or even like an object, like a snake, like David just said. And then you let that person talk through you to discover the therapist or like interviews and interrogates this sub person within you about why they're doing this. And then hopefully you can convince them that they don't need to do this self-sabotaging behavior anymore. But it's all very, positive and good vibes only sort of thing. But the problem is that they kept bumping into things that did not identify as part of the person and then would self-identify as demons. That this kept happening over and over again.
Common issue. A very common issue.
And it's just one of those things where it's like, man, this whole spiritual realm stuff is coming back with a vengeance, and it's sort of related to the psychedelic things. And if you just probe people and try and split apart their personality into multiple personalities and encourage this like sort of trance-like hypnotic state, then like lo and behold, demons start showing up, or that there have been demons in them the whole time, and that they do not want the good of the person. Like the whole idea
MK
of
Ultra, because this is how we get MK Ultra, okay?
So
and then another part of that was, wasn't it that the practice had to be passed down to somebody? Yes. And so that's weird to me. Only in that I would imagine you have to pay for this. So it's like paying for sponsorship, but like also summoning demons. So that sounds very weird.
And at some point it's like when are we just going to admit that the Christians had this demon thing figured out? And it's weird, like lurking in the background of that article was like, well, the Christians have been talking about demons this whole time, and they seemingly have a system of how to beat these demons, because these internal family systems people, they seemingly sometimes could exorcise a demon, but they're like trying to persuade it to go away. And they're like, hey, demon, look up. There's light above you. Just go up to the light and leave this person alone. And like that would sometimes work. But then you exorcise a demon, and guess what happens after you exorcise a demon? Well, more demons come back. Huh. What does that sound like? And then another thing that they figured out is like you need to ask a demon where they are in the hierarchy of the demons within the person. Because it turns out oftentimes there's lots of demons within people. What does that sound like? It's like, okay. Oh, and there's different classifications of demons. Some demons are extraterrestrials or from a higher realm. Some are the spirits of dead people from long ago. Oh, okay, wait a minute, Nephilim, right? That's what we called that. And so they have this whole hierarchy and systemization of demons that like maps perfectly onto what Christians have been saying this whole time. And like, you read the Gospels and Jesus is like, oh, well, that demon only comes out this way. Or it's like, oh, it's so, and they're embarrassed by it. The funny thing is like they did not want this to happen because it's showing that their system doesn't work because they're like, only positive vibes, just like warm and affirmation, and that'll make everything better. But these demons don't seem to respond to that. And seem to be like not hoping for the best or actively oriented towards evil. And another thing that was super interesting in the article is like these demons seem to feed off of negative energy. So they get people to do things that make them feel bad, and then they feel more bad. And then the demon is able to grow off of that. And then the demon has more influence. So then they make them do more bad things. And then that feeds the demon even more, right? So it's a negative feedback loop of demon strengthening. And it's one of those things where it's like, this is both weird, fascinating, highly familiar to anyone who comes from a charismatic background. And like the fact that even these materialists are running out of options to explain what these things are and how to deal with them is showing that something in the air is changing.
Well, in polite mainstream Christianity, see Sam here or whatever says, that's one thing. Even talking about the Holy Spirit, like I was a Holy Spirit charismatic house church guy. Like you start talking about Holy Spirit and activation and stuff like that. That makes a lot of. And I just say they're materialist Christians, right? Yeah. In some ways, whether they would say it or not, they're almost cessationists because they're like, well, I don't see these things and I can't believe it, so I'm just it doesn't exist, right? Whatever, like, there's this whole realm that doesn't have this full idea of like, yeah, there's principalities and powers, and like you said, Jesus even said, yeah, that one only goes away with prayer and fasting, guys. Sorry.
And I think, and maybe Sam, this is part of what you're getting at, the idea that like this also has to be incorporated. Like we were talking about ideas that need to be incorporated. And Sam, I even think that you're an example of this, like a seeking for consistency, and that you're asking that things be incorporated fully. And so that there's certain theological lines that a lot of Christians aren't comfortable with. And you're saying, no, you have to notice these things. And so like, I was involved in some stuff with Muslims for a while, and they are dealing with YouTube what was previously dealt with in Christianity through the printing press, which is that there are ideas that are now out there and you have to deal with them. You cannot ignore them anymore. You cannot just be sticking in your one community where these ideas are not going to come in. You are actually going to have to face them. You're going to have to incorporate them. And for some of you, incorporating them will utterly destroy you, but they must be incorporated.
Mm-hmm. Anthony asked the question, Sam, why are these demons listening and obeying therapists? In the article, it seemed to suggest that sometimes they do, but a lot of times they don't. And that the therapists often struggle with exorcism, and they have a whole exorcism manual, but it seemed like an imperfect science. And like oftentimes, like I said, they get rid of a demon and then more demons come back. And
isn't there that story where those guys are casting out demons, and I know Paul and I know Christ, but who are you? And then attacks them.
And makes them naked, strips them naked. That's one of the parts that that doesn't make it into the flannel graph.
But I agree with what you were saying, David, about like this is something that needs to be integrated. And and you could see Slate Star Codex was like, I mean, he's a materialist and he's really doing his best at the end of this article to try and wrangle this thing back inside the materialist frame. But it was the least interesting and least convincing part of the article.
Sam, what needs to be integrated? What part are we saying needs to be integrated? I mean,
well, he needs to put this back in. Your mind is a machine that runs on neurons and wires and firings and regions, and we need to explain it back with a materialistic way of how the brain works, and come back to that idea. And but he didn't quite have an answer for that.
Have you ever read Edith Turner, the Reality of Spirits, a taboo or permitted subject in anthropology? Have you ever read that book?
No.
Okay, or it's a paper. It's a paper. It's not too
Edith
Turner. So she's an anthropologist. She's written like entire textbooks on it. Her and her husband. But she writes this article that is so funny to me because I get the underlining tone where she's like, look, as anthropologists, we're all trying to be these like scientifically minded things, but all like minded people, but all of us who worked in the field have seen some shit that we have no idea how to explain.
And that's exactly what's going on with these internal family systems people. It's like, we're scientists, we're materialists, we're therapists, we're using like science and like good psychology ideas. And the thing is it seemed like everyone was encountering the same phenomenon and they were mostly shut up and quiet about it. And then they would start whispering to each other, hey, have you ever like had one of your patients say that they were a demon? And then like, it turns out like, all of them have had this experience, and then they start like secretly trying to share techniques and ideas about this, but they're embarrassed and don't want to admit it. Well, and then this book finally comes out. It's like, guys, we just like need to talk about this. Apparently, we tried to fix people, and they had demons inside them.
So Edith Turner is at this. She's investigating this tribe in Africa, and this woman she thinks is like schizophrenic, and then they do an exorcism at night around this big campfire, and she sees what she describes as looking as though it's a creature comes out of the girl's back that looks like it's either made out of shadow or smoke, hovers above for a few seconds, and then takes off into the night. And you can, while she's writing about this, you can tell that she wants to swear. You can tell that she's just like, what the fuck am I supposed to do with that? Like, I want to be a scientist. I am trying so hard. And you see, and I'm separate. I'm the scientist analyzing this. But then a creature made out of shadow or smoke comes out of someone's back and takes off into the night. And then the girl was in her right mind. What am I to do with that, right? Like,
yeah. And it's funny, like what I think was Jess or Lance saying this, that there are many kinds of Christianity that aren't even ready to deal with this. There are two kinds of Christianity that are here for it. It is the Pentecostals and it is certain branches of Catholicism that were always into this stuff, right?
Well, and Orthodox do exorcisms too, right? So that thing, yeah.
Well, and also it's a Western world thing. You go overseas. Like I remember I was in I was in Costa Rica, and this woman was saying, we're gonna maybe go over to her house. She's like, yeah, we can't go over to our house right now because my sister's there and she has a demon. And she said it just sort of like flat out. And this is a Christian woman, and like, yeah, she's like acting out and stuff. We don't know how to get the demon out of her. And we're just like, okay. and so it's just
I don't want to go over to your house either, come to think of it.
Yeah. But she just sort of said it matter of factly. And so I was just sort of like, yeah. But like the pastors and Christians that I ran into, like around the the third world and just non-Western places, we're pretty much comfortable in those areas, casting things out.
And people are saying Western, non-Western, but Pentecostalism is about as American a form of Christianity as they come.
But
so I'm not quite sure. I kind of agree that it's a Western, non-Western thing in that, third world, global south, whatever the right phrase is, these things are much more commonly accepted and not taboo and frequently encountered. But, Pentecostalism, to give it its due, it like started in Los Angeles. So,
so there's a bit where we oftentimes it's stopped in the quote on "Don't sleep, there are snakes." Like Paul keeps on referencing this thing where they talk about the god on the side of the river. What sometimes gets forgotten, and Michael was posting a video on part of what happens after that, is after he tells the people about Jesus, they don't want anything to do with Jesus because Jesus has showed up to the village and is trying to sexually assault people. And he's just like, the guy, he knows that they're not lying, but he's like, was someone pretending to be Jesus? What was going on? And it never enters his mind that there is a spirit pretending to be Jesus who is now appearing as an evil entity. That doesn't enter his mind at all as a possibility.
I was hoping that PBK would actually interview that guy at some point. He's still alive. I think his name is David something or other. None of this stuff should shock us. I mean, we grew up on Ghostbusters.
Well, about the Pentecostals, like I wasn't like totally immersed in Pentecostalism, but I did my rounds, and like the Pentecostals are still slightly buffered just because of our world and culture. Like I got into I would describe myself, I guess, as charismatic, growing up charismatic because of the type of environment. It was Holy Spirit, tongues, slaying in the Spirit, casting, taking spiritual world seriously, casting out demons, that kind of stuff. But even like a lot of charismatic Western people, when we got into these situations in India or wherever, like it was a whole different thing. Like it wasn't like the spiritual reality that the Pentecostals lived in. It was something different that the Christians there were more versed and comfortable in.
Slate Star Codex talked about how, well, perhaps a really good way to treat demons is to just not believe in demons because it's basically a suggestion thing. And if you're suggesting to people that demons exist, then lo and behold, a certain kind of person, a highly suggestible, somewhat borderline personality already, lo and behold, they'll start acting like a demon. So just don't suggest to them that demons are a thing and you won't get any demons. And that maybe materialism is sort of a good fence against demons. And I'm like, in a certain sense, I actually kind of agree with what he's saying. Like part of the reason why the Western world doesn't have a lot of this stuff is because of its kind of more materialist metaphysics. And in a certain sense, there probably is more mental sanity because of that. But I was thinking that the cart and the horse might be a little bit different than what he was suggesting. I think that because the West was so Christianized and that Jesus drives out the demons, that it's sort of, and that Christianity sort of in like a Tom Holland Dominion sort of sense is like a evangelization of mental sanity in addition to being other things. That because the West was so kind of sane spiritually for a while, it became easy to not believe in demons because, St. Patrick had scared away all the snakes. Jesus had scared away all the demons in Western culture for a long time. And that when we're bumping up against these cultures that aren't as thoroughly Christianized, we were seeing things that we hadn't seen in a long time and we didn't know what to make of it. But what I think is happening now is that Christendom is breaking down And as soon as Christendom starts breaking down, lo and behold, the demons are at the gate ready to come back. And they come in through weird and unexpected doors like psychedelics and internal family systems and other weird stuff like that.
There's another one, which is there's a documentary called The Nightmare, and it's about sleep paralysis and specifically the characters. And I felt similar, Sam, about that topic, because the people who speak about sleep paralysis will tell you if you talk about it too much, people will get it.
Yeah.
So that it actually can spread. But when they start describing what is experienced in this documentary, like, it's terrifying, and it's just people describing their
a demon. Yeah. I've heard
very clearly characters made out of shadow with glowing red eyes
that paralyze them right before they're about to fall asleep, and then they can't breathe, and they feel like this demon is sucking in everything. And
sometimes they feel claws into their skin, and
or pressure on their chest, or
And in the documentary, if you just watch it, the guy is not a Christian. One person in the group no longer suffers from sleep paralysis, and it's a girl who wasn't a Christian, but while it was one of the times it was happening, says, "I heard somewhere that there was power in the name of Jesus," and claims the name of Jesus, and she's the only one in the documentary who no longer faces the sleep paralysis.
And lurking in the background of this Slate Star Codex article is the name of Jesus, because he's like, well, I was reading about China once upon a time in like the 1800s, and there was all sorts of demons and stuff like that. And the only people that would reliably be able to deal with the demons were the Christian missionaries. And that these Chinese people learned to seek out the Christian missionaries because they were the only people who had any reliable demon or power over the demons. And so in a culture that is not very deeply Christian, where a lot of Chinese people in the 1800s might not know anything about Jesus, literally never heard of anything about Christianity, and word quickly spreads that these Christian missionaries are the only people who have some sort of secret.
Have you guys dealt with demons?
Not personally, but my dad has quite a bit. My dad was in the 60s and early 70s, before he was a Christian, was very into psychedelics and new agey stuff and hypnosis and things like that. And he will say that he was basically playing with demons, and that he was doing this because he was bored and it was fun or interesting, like a lot of bored hippie kids at that time did. And that that this was part of what led him to charismatic Christianity. And that after he became a Christian, he had to exorcise demons out of a lot of his friends and stuff like that. And then it worked.
Anyone else?
I've just had the boring one where I'm being hit by a horrible and terrible feelings of some kind, and then without even knowing it, a friend I'm going through this huge depression. It's massive things coming at me. It's terrible. And then all of a sudden it all goes away. And then a friend tells me that they're praying for me at that moment. And they don't know why. It's just randomly in a day that they're praying for me. And then it just so happens to be the exact same time that something like this is changing.
Yeah, for me, Chad, it's everything. I'm very charismatic, but I also was always highly suspect when I was in charismatic circles that there were things that were going on that weren't true actions of the Spirit, let's just say, right? So you get both going on. So I also think with respect to this, if you spot a demon everywhere, not everything's a demon. But I think there certainly are those instances. So if you'd asked me, Chad, when I was in treatment, you have to write a bunch of letters, right? One of the things that I really, and I believe this to this day, is my addiction certainly was a demon that wanted me dead, and kept taking me to places to the brink of death, whether that be I would kill myself or do things that could bring that on. I also was in certain places, I know the difference between being around people that are addicts, and it's kind of just people would feel a darkness, but I have been around certain people, and it was during that time of my life where I put myself in those areas around certain people where I knew immediately this person is dangerous and dark and I need to get out. You know what I mean? Like I just knew that there was something going on. Like there was an evil there. So for me, those are some of my experiences with it. But I need to make sure I don't see demons everywhere because they are everywhere. There's other things, but I also like, I've always realized this with Christianity. Like if you're going to be a Christian, there's a lot of crunchy, wild stuff that comes along with that. And you better just embrace it.
I got attacked by 3 demons one time.
Tell me.
It was in Costa Rica. We were out in this tiny village out in the middle of the nowhere. I woke up in the middle of the night feeling absolutely terrible. But like as I'm waking up, I had 3 demons over me, one in my head, one at my torso, and then one at my legs. And they're doing whatever they're doing. They're hurting me. And so then I kind of wake up and they dissipate. So I'm like, you know, I'm curious what all that was, but I start getting pretty sick. And the next day we were supposed to go to another village. So we go to the next village and I'm like just laying down in the back of this pickup truck. Like I've got stomach issues. I've got like all these sores inside my mouth and on my lips. And then my legs are aching. My back is aching. You know, nothing too crazy, basically like flu symptoms, but I had these sores in my mouth too. And then, so anyway, the following day, they end up taking me to the hospital in a nearby town. So we go into the hospital and they diagnosed me with 3 different things. I had a stomach problem. I had a stomach bug. I had actually like a flu virus. And then I had turned out to be like an allergy, a food allergy to mangoes, produced all the sores in my mouth. But it was funny because when I went to the hospital, I didn't tell them any of that, of course, but it was 3 demons. And then they diagnosed me. They're like, yeah, you have 3 things kind of going on. And then they gave me a shot and some medicine. And yeah.
Wow.
Well,
That's quite a story.
Yeah, it is. I just want to ask selfishly, I guess, that if what you're saying is true, that somebody's praying for you, that they go away, I want to ask anybody out there, pray for me, because I've been dealing with a lot of my own stuff I don't want to talk about, but and I don't know, it's really weird because this topic seems to have been coming up at the very least since Saturday when they talked about when I was talking with those people and they talked about spiritual warfare and stuff. And so is it a coincidence or anything like that that all these talks about possession and stuff are coming up? And I don't think about this is not a topic that I ever really consider, really. But yeah, I don't like asking people to pray for me, but I would appreciate it.
I will. I definitely will. Okay, Chad?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And like the thing is, yeah. Can a demon be with you for a lifetime?
Kim, what?
Can a demon be with you for a lifetime?
Seems plausible.
Maybe.
In the Slate Star Codex article, some of the demons claim to have been generationally passed on within a family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and when this came up, Chad, because you were in here, I immediately was thinking of Legion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, even the idea of household gods, like one of the things to remember is the term god and the term demon are the same, right? Like that you could have household demons essentially,
Yeah.
where, yeah.
Sorry to make it weird. It's just I needed to ask because otherwise I don't want to ask.
No, this is exactly right. I'm really glad the direction this went in is because we talk so hypothetical that it's just like, no. If the world is weird and we're a group of people, I actually think this is very encouraging. Is that if you want evidence for the spiritual realm, you gather a group of people that believe in it and you say, okay, who has a story where this happened? And this used to be a part of church. Right, where people would share these stories and that they encouraged people. Like that's one of the reasons why stories of saints are written down, to encourage and inform us on how the world works.
Well, and this goes back to the thing Jess was talking about, where it's important to have a spiritual father, a sponsor, a disciple leader, or something like that, is you should share these stories about things and have people with good discernment. I guess what I was thinking about there, Sam, would be maybe discernment, like discern the spirits. Like sometimes it is this thing, sometimes it's not that thing. And having people around you who are for you and you trust to help you discern these things to try and figure this stuff out. Because, on your own, I could just say myself, like, on our own, we can concoct about anything, right? And it's important to have that check. And like in your tradition, Sam, that's why you had people that were the people who interpreted tongues, right? Because they had it shown and a bit, they had trust. There was a trust that had been built up amongst the congregation that the wacky person's not going to come up and say these wild things like, hey, we all the spaceship's going to all take us up, whatever. And so we're all going to get together and put on our Nikes and drink the Kool-Aid sort of thing. You know what I mean?
Right. And I've been thinking, so like, how exactly did Jesus's crucifixion beat the demons? And like, what exactly is the source of that? Like, how does that even work? How do we even think about that? Because I think the comfort that Christians should have is that we don't need to beat the demons ourselves, that Jesus beat the demons, and that we don't need to use our own strength to have to beat these spiritual powers, because that won't work. And there's people all over the world who have been trying to beat these spiritual powers with their own strength and like feel defeated and captured and controlled and scared. But Jesus beat the demons. And then through Jesus's victory, by allying ourselves with Jesus, recognizing him as Lord, he helps us beat the demons too. But it's like, how exactly does that work? I don't know. It's a crazy thing.
Is magic an option? Can we put magic on the table?
I'm fine with magic. Yes.
I don't want to get into the fine points because I think this does exist within Protestant thought too. I'm not trying to do ortho Protestant, but I'm just, so for example, like when you come in and you're baptized and chrismated, like literally that portion is kind of considered an exorcism in Orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I really love about it is you actually spit on Satan. Like you come in, you denounce it, and you spit. And I love seeing people spit, and it's like, I like that. The picture just makes me I kind of giggle when I see it too. Like I have that reaction, and I just love it. But there is an effect about going to the baptism, and then the chrismation is the sealing of the Holy Spirit. Like, and so listen, I think there's like these things that Christ has revealed, like baptism, right? Which is good. Let's don't worry about what happens at it, but there's this shared belief that there's power in baptism, right, Sam? I think that could be a mere Christianity sort of thing. And I do think that there are actually doing some of these revealed practices that Jesus has given us, like there is power and effect to that. And I don't want to get down on the weeds. That's not the argument, but I think there is some form of protection with that. And I think we seek out, for us, I think it's, if we were having these conversations where we read it out about it and we were going to people with good discernment, like we would continue, like that'd be a natural part of our Christian life, right? Like, hey, I got this. Is this a demon? It's like, well, I don't think it's a demon. Like, I think, whatever. Or, wow, this is what, like people who've seen it and know it, because like, Jesus talked about you don't know the Holy Spirit because you don't know how to look for it or recognize it, whatever in John. I think there are spiritual people that have like, oh, wow, like I know what this is. You know what I mean? Like they know exactly what that is. And so I love the crunchy bits. Like this is the crunchy bits of Christianity, right? And if we're going to believe in a resurrected Christ and all these other things and the invisible and all this other sort of stuff, like, of course this stuff is real.
Yeah, well, I think it has to do with authority.
And even the materialist, like the article, I can't read it, Sam, but even the materialist therapists are recognizing it's real, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to do with authority, like Jesus, like that's how it's talked about, at least in the Gospels. Jesus gives his disciples authority. He has the authority to do these things, you know. And then there's people that don't quite have the authority in certain situations, and then, you know, and it's interesting because you get the idea that the demons have to listen to Jesus, and they're kind of like fighting and whatever, but they ultimately have to like listen to him, which is kind of strange. You'd think like one of them would just be like, I'm not doing what you're telling me to do. You know, what happens then? Like, we don't see that example. So it's like always sort of like Christ has this sort of like final say. Even there was like, I forget what the context was, but I was reading something where they were talking about people were experimenting with kind of occult type stuff, and they were trying to do it as sort of secular materialists, whatever. But they found out that they could get stuff to happen, but it wouldn't really work if there was a crucifix around. And so there was one situation where they had invited a new person to kind of see what they were doing, and they were trying to do this one thing that was successful before, and it wasn't really happening. And it turned out she actually had just like a cross on a necklace tucked under her shirt. And they asked her, they're like, do you have a crucifix on you? And she was like, yeah. And then, you know, maybe this is a, you know, a urban legend thing or whatever, but
It's a good legend. Keep going.
But there's something about like even the sign of the cross. There's something about all that actually has power and authority. We're in sort of our secular materialism. We're sort of like, we have the worldview that authority just sort of emerges out of like arbitrary social structures, and we do it to organize certain things or whatever. And so like when it comes to demons, we're like, we don't really believe in authority. And then, but it seems like that's one of the key things, at least.
I was listening to someone, and they were doing astral projection, and it was very interesting to follow their videos. They're off YouTube now, but for a period of time, you could find these videos where this guy's experimenting with this stuff. And I was trying to figure out, okay, what is this? What spiritual component of this is legit or whatever? So he was doing this thing, and if you don't know how astral projection works, he would ask someone an address, and he would try to astrally project, go out of his body to see these places, and then he would describe them to people to see if he was doing it legitimately or if it was just in his head. And he could describe people's cottages. He would describe people's cottages that he had never been to, okay, and stuff like that. But what happens is he becomes curious about aliens, and he wants to see one of these characters, and he believes he sees a demon. And he has this encounter that he doesn't know how to explain, that all of a sudden, when you're doing this stuff, people can't see you. He says, this thing knew I was there, hated me to my absolute core. And then he wakes up and he's like, I don't even believe in Christianity, but I think I need an exorcism. And this is how he becomes a Christian. He becomes a Christian because while astral projecting, he encounters a demon. This was like, and I went through a bunch of things that are basically lost to YouTube at this point. People's firsthand experiences of how they became a Christian by accidentally encountering demons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's that lady who, I forget, has she been on PVK's channel or she's been around? She was like super into psychedelic stuff, and then basically had
Emily Verduen, Mud Hut.
Sherry.
Oh, right. It's too many people. It's also my
I've heard both of those. I know who both of those people, and that's actually also not who I'm talking about. I'm trying to remember some other person. There's too many
people have dabbled in pharmakia, because remember, again, psychedelics would be labeled as the occult in the New Testament. Pharmakia have these experiences. Sorry, Sam, continue.
No, that's okay. And yeah, they encountering too many demons and these things out there that seem real, that seem like not yourself, and that this starts to break down materialism, gets scary, and then you need help. And this idea lurking in the back of every Western person's mind is that they know where the help against the demons is already.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll find her name. She wrote a book, I believe, recently. I should interview her. That would be a good interview.
Well, I think, and the other thing I think that, Paul talks about school spirit or whatever, and I shared that thing Luke shared, that there's spirits or demons or principalities and powers when he's talking about mammon and, kind of what I started this out with, like I think both the right and the left or the conservative or liberal, whatever you think about in church, like there are these spirits that can come in, principalities and powers, right, that can shift us in certain ways, and I think they have in the church in the United States, right? I'm not speaking about all Christians in every church, but there have been these major movements, right, that I think that gets back to this, like, something's missing, the meaning crisis, the collapse in the church, right? I think all this stuff, like this
I really want someone to say this is why they were part of the movement, because no one ever says, oh, I was part of the Young, Restless, and Reformed because that's what the spirits made me do. Right? They always have this internal, oh, I was thinking of this or I was thinking of that. It's just like, no, I was possessed momentarily, and that's how I got into the charismatic movement. You had to be there.
I think that's interesting. So when we hear people's stories, like I know, Jess, you spent a lot of time thinking about it. I think some people, so now let's start talking about principalities and powers. I think I definitely have heard, whether it's explicit or not, people had gotten caught up in the spirit or the principality of certain worldviews. And then ultimately, that caused them to go to some sort of existential crisis. And then they ended up coming back in and seeking that. I think you've heard that. Would you agree, Jess? Like, isn't that a part of it?
How so?
Well, just like ultimately they caught up in the spirit of this thing. Like,
yeah.
I could even think about something like Paul Kingsnorth's story. He went through the end of Zen Buddhism, but really he started practicing Wiccan. And when he was starting to practice Wiccan, all of a sudden what started happening to him is Jesus just kept bothering him, and like he didn't want the reality of it to be Jesus, because it's like the exact opposite of what he wanted to be. And then ultimately Jesus is like, you keep seeking this thing, and it's me. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And he was getting sick when he was going to the Wiccan stuff or whatever. So I do think that people are realizing, like, I think you'll find a lot of people that might have pressed deep hard into, I'm just using rough terms, this woke nihilism, and they find themselves at an existential crisis, and then they come back into, or they come out of secular families, and now they're finding their way into churches. Like, I do think that people reach the end of certain spirits and principalities, because I do believe, like what Luke was pointing out is like, guys, there are principalities and spirits and these certain things that are in our culture, right, that you could almost go to the level of, like, if I were Satan or I were a demon, these are the hidden things that I'd love to get you in love with, these sorts of things, and believing these ideologies, so to speak.
The catchphrase I say go to church, and what I mean by that is, in some ways, it's you have to engage in the human relationships around you. That's like the best way to go about that. You have relationship, you have a family, you have some kind of community around you, and so that's the best place to go, because in some ways that's the place that will have this procedural aspect to it that will ground the other stuff. It's like if you have to to help your kid with their homework, or you have to do this kind of really grounded stuff that has very little to do with the ideology, you get engaged in other people's lives, then it binds you in a different way, right? It binds you.
And then, like, my father would he was going to church, and I wasn't really living with him, but he was going to church, and he would, like, kind of, so those are elements of this conversation. I got to go to church.
it's being part of a church is part of Christian discipleship. And in that word discipleship, there's this word discipline, which is, it's a discipline to go to church.
What would be so great about actually going to a church is like you start going to a church so that when you do need like to be prayed for, when you have something to be prayed for about, you have a place to just say that.
You're dead on right, Grizz, and that is what the church is for. To know and be known, to love and be loved, to have a place to go where people can pray for you, where they will welcome you in. And this is, again, part of why I'm, you know, I want churches to have estuaries, because it is, I know that it is difficult in many churches for people to, in a sense, come in and bring their real self. And what I mean by that is have to say what's on their mind, or you can't wrestle with them. It's like, you know, so Plato, you know, as John reminds us, is broad, so he's a wrestler. You can't wrestle over a screen. So maybe if it's paintball for Jesus, maybe it should be wrestling with Plato. Because, and in church, in a real space, now often it doesn't happen, I understand that, but at least there's a chance to actually have a relationship with grit. And that's part of why churches are local, they're relational, they're face-to-face, they're in real life.
Said about why would young people want to go to church, and I feel like I want to have some kind of dynamic message or something that if they do find some reason to come, you know, I'm trying to fish, so I'm throwing bait and I'm trying to hook somebody. And it's what Paul is doing too. He said about being evangelical. It's evangelism of some sort.
Well, fishers of men is the
yes.
Is the promise, yes?
Yes, correct.
It's possessed. We did go to church today. I took communion.
I don't go to church to think or to rationalize God. I go to church to worship Him. Right? And that's, I'm happy with that. I'm very happy with that. And afterwards, during coffee hour, we can all argue about the God of our understanding, right? Yeah.
But I think you're right. I think that the wild twin, I mean, the thing that led to my sort of dawning to consciousness of Christianity was a 101-day vigil that I did in forest. And I went into the forest.
You don't have to go crazy.
Yeah.
You actually have to go, you have to humble yourself and be, and do it right here, right now, right?
Get up. I like how Father Schmemann talks about it for the life of the world. He says it starts when you get up and get ready and you walk or you go to church. So you start those are simple. I get up. I brush my teeth, I take a shower, I put on clothes, I go, the things of life, and we're ascending up into heaven. You're